We're going to start with Rousseau. Rousseau was a philosopher who expanded on Hobbes and Locke's ideas about government in his book, The Social Contract. This social contract referred to the idea that the government has an agreement between the authorities and the people. People agreed to obey the government in exchange for the government protecting their rights and security. Rousseau argued that in order for the social contract to function properly, the government must focus on what is good for everyone as a whole. People's individual rights must be limited in some ways. Otherwise, no one's rights would be secure. For example, the government has to be able to say that no one has the right to take whatever they want without repercussion, or that no one has the right to stab anyone. For the overall protection of people's rights, there cannot be absolute freedom. Now, remember how Thomas Hobbes argued that you needed a strong, absolute monarch or one ruler to keep people in check? Well, Rousseau argued that democracy was the best way to determine what policies would be best for society. Democracy is when everybody in the community gets a say in what happens and they get a vote. He said that the general will of the people must be determined to see what limits need to be set on the people and what laws should be followed. So he felt that we should know what the people want in order to determine what limits we should set on them and what freedoms we should allow the people to have. Rousseau believed that monarchy only benefited the ruler. A true democracy would be the best way to protect the rights of everyone as a whole, according to Rousseau. Next, we're going to talk about Montesquieu. Montesquieu actually studied the governments of all different countries at the time in the 1700s, and he decided that he thought England had the best form of government. England's government was made up of three separate branches of government, right? This should look kind of familiar because it is something that you see now in the United States, right? Montesquieu called these three branches the separation of powers. This is when the government is split into branches to make sure that no one person has too much power. England had an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch of government. The executive branch of government is made up of the monarchy. So it's one person who carries out laws and runs the government. The legislative branch of government was England's parliament. So they made the laws. And the judicial branch was the court systems that interpreted the laws and ruled on how they should be applied. Like I said before, this should sound very familiar to you based on the government that we use in America. Montesquieu believed that separation of powers made for the best government because this way each branch could work to ensure that no other branch abused its power or the rights of the people. So having three branches in power meant that nobody could take too much control. Different branches of government protected people's rights because they acted as checks and balances against one another. Right, these checks and balances made sure that each branch had some authority over the other branches, so no branch had too much control. It limited the powers of each branch. It assures that each one has to work with the other branches and that no one branch can become too powerful. So the entire idea is that nobody gets all of the power because they have to make sure that the other branches keep them in check. America's founding fathers ended up being highly influenced by Montesquieu's ideas. So they created three branches of government as well to have checks and balances. That is why this should look so familiar to you because the founding fathers founded what will become the United States of America. For example, if the legislative branch, which in America is Congress, passes a bad law, then they give the executive branch, which is the president, the power to veto that law or say, no, that law is not good enough. Next, we're going to talk about Voltaire. Voltaire was one of the most famous English philosophers during the Enlightenment period, and he was a French writer known as Voltaire. Perhaps his most significant legacy was his writings on religion. In his book, A Treatise on Tolerance, Voltaire wrote about how society should treat a diversity of religious faiths, or how society should treat having a bunch of different religions being practiced. In his book, A Treatise on Tolerance, Voltaire wrote about a tragic case about a man named Jean Callis. This case was important because it helped shape Voltaire's ideas about religious tolerance. I'm going to let this video explain the case to you. After hearing of and working on this case and observing the devastation that was going on in the wars of religion between the Catholics and Protestants, Voltaire came to a simple conclusion that intolerance between religious faiths led to nothing but tragedy and devastation. Voltaire argued that societies should offer freedom of religion. During those awful wars that shaped Voltaire's ideology, the wars of religion included seeing things such as mass murders, torture, rape, the deaths of women, children, soldiers, peasants, and even kings. According to Voltaire, no amount of religious disagreement justified these effects. Voltaire also believed that while there were differences between the Catholics and the Protestants, who were engaging in that war together, they had far more in common with each other than they had differences. So Voltaire believed that government should not force anyone into following a single religion. Doing so only would lead to war, death, and destruction. And so to summarize, Voltaire, he felt very strongly about religious freedom and making sure that everybody tolerated ideas that maybe they didn't agree with, but that they were still kind to those people and did not start wars because of those religions. To summarize, Rousseau was the man who decided that it was a very good idea to have a true democracy where everybody had a say in what happened in their society or and in their government, rather than having one powerful leader like in an absolute monarchy. Montesquieu was the man who decided it was a very good idea to have those three different branches in your government in order to make sure that there isn't one branch that has too much power. This will lessen the likelihood that the government will abuse that power. And lastly, Voltaire was the man who felt very strongly about making sure that everyone is tolerant of people practicing different religions around them.